The morning sun rose over New Haven Colony, casting golden light across the settlement that had become home to 8,000 human souls. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the defense station, watching the planet rotate slowly beneath him. His coffee had gone cold in his hand, but he did not notice. Something felt wrong today, though he could not explain why. Down on the surface, Lisa Chang was already at her desk in the Colonial Administration Building. Her daughter Amy had left for school an hour earlier, chattering excitedly about a science project on local minerals. Lisa smiled at the memory, then turned her attention to the reports flooding her screen. The Galactic Council representative had sent another message demanding reduced mining operations. It was the fifth such message this month. Jake's communication officer interrupted his thoughts with news of an incoming transmission from a trader friend. The man's face appeared on screen, his expression grave. Council warships were moving through nearby sectors in numbers far beyond normal patrol strength. Nobody knew why, but the trader urged caution. Jake thanked him and ended the call, his unease growing stronger. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council 30 years ago with hope and optimism. The Council was an alliance of 12 advanced alien species that had governed known space for 3,000 years. Humans were the newcomers, the young species that needed guidance and restraint. At least that was what the Council members said. Humanity had agreed to limit military expansion, restrict territorial claims, and follow Council laws in exchange for protection and trade access. New Haven represented everything humanity hoped to achieve in space. The colony was peaceful and prosperous. Families had built homes and lives here. Children attended school and played in parks designed to remind them of Earth. The mines produced rare minerals that helped fuel human expansion, and relations with neighboring alien species were friendly. But Jake had noticed changes over the past year. Council Ambassador Threlnax, a reptilian Kryn who stood nearly 8 feet tall, had become increasingly aggressive in his demands. The Kryn were one of the most powerful Council species, known for their military strength and rigid adherence to hierarchy. Threlnax seemed to view humans as unruly children who needed discipline. Lisa had tried reasoning with the ambassador, explaining that New Haven's mining operations were well within agreed limits. Threlnax dismissed her explanations, claiming humans always found ways to bend rules. He implied that the Council was watching humanity closely and would not tolerate violations. Lisa had filed formal complaints, but the Council bureaucracy moved slowly when dealing with human concerns. Jake commanded 3 patrol ships, the entirety of New Haven's military defense. The Defiant was his flagship, a capable vessel but nothing compared to Council warships. The other 2 ships, Vigilant and Guardian, were even smaller. Under the demilitarization treaties, humanity could not station stronger forces in this sector. Jake had argued for exceptions, but Earth government insisted on following Council regulations to the letter. The defense station itself was modest, capable of monitoring space traffic and providing coordination for the patrol ships. Jake's crew of 42 worked efficiently, most of them veterans who had transferred from Earth's main fleet. They were professionals who took pride in protecting the colony, even with limited resources. On the planet below, Amy sat in her classroom with 200 other children. Her teacher, a kind woman named Helen Carter, was explaining the formation of the mineral deposits that made New Haven valuable. Amy listened carefully, taking notes for her project. She had no idea that within hours her life would change forever. Lisa finished reviewing the latest mining reports and decided to visit the education facility during lunch. She liked spending time at the school, seeing Amy and the other children who represented the colony's future. As she stood to leave her office, her assistant mentioned that long-range sensors had detected unusual energy signatures in the outer system. Lisa made a note to ask Jake about it later. Jake was already investigating those signatures. His sensor officer reported that the readings were consistent with faster-than-light engines, far more than would be normal for civilian traffic. Jake ordered his patrol ships to assume defensive positions and began running through emergency protocols. If this was a pirate raid, his small force would need every advantage. The Galactic Council had always insisted that the younger species needed protection from various threats. Pirates, rogue states, and territorial disputes were common in frontier regions. The Council's enforcement fleets patrolled major routes, maintaining order through overwhelming force. Most species accepted this arrangement, grateful for the stability. But some humans had begun questioning whether the Council's protection was worth the restrictions imposed. Admiral Frank Hayes, commander of Earth's primary defense fleet, had argued publicly that humanity needed freedom to defend itself. He believed the Council wanted to keep humans weak and dependent. Patricia Nguyen, Earth's Secretary General, had dismissed such concerns as paranoid, insisting that cooperation with the Council served humanity's best interests. Jake had heard these debates but tried to stay focused on his duty. Politics were for people on Earth. His job was protecting New Haven. He checked the positions of his 3 ships and confirmed that all weapon systems were ready. The Defiant carried missiles and railguns, effective against smaller threats but inadequate against capital ships. Lisa arrived at the school and found Amy in the cafeteria with her friends. The children were laughing and eating, completely carefree. Lisa felt a surge of love and protectiveness. These children deserved to grow up in peace, to build lives without fear. She had left Earth specifically to give Amy opportunities on a frontier world, away from the crowded cities and rigid structures of home. Helen Carter joined Lisa for coffee, and they discussed plans for an upcoming field trip to the mining facilities. Helen was enthusiastic about showing children where their parents worked and explaining the importance of resource extraction. She believed education should be practical and connected to real life. Lisa agreed, promising to arrange clearances and transportation. High above, Jake watched his sensors as the energy signatures grew stronger. Whatever was approaching was big, much bigger than pirates would have. He tried contacting the colonial government network, but Lisa was away from her desk. He left an urgent message and ordered his crew to battle stations. The peaceful morning on New Haven was about to end. Forces had been set in motion that would test humanity's resolve and reveal the true nature of the Galactic Council. Jake gripped his command chair, feeling the weight of responsibility for 8,000 lives. Lisa finished her coffee and hugged Amy goodbye, unaware that it might be the last normal moment they would ever share. The children returned to their classes and the colony continued its routine, innocent of the storm descending upon them from the stars. The sky above New Haven tore open with blinding light as 40 Council warships emerged from faster-than-light travel. Jake stared at his displays in disbelief as the massive fleet materialized in formation around the planet. Each ship was easily 3 times the size of the Defiant, their hulls gleaming with advanced armor and bristling with weapons. This was not a patrol force or even a show of strength. This was an invasion fleet. Jake opened all communication channels and demanded an explanation. The response came from Supreme Commander Vector, a Kryn whose face filled the screen with cold reptilian features. His voice was harsh and final as he declared that New Haven had violated Council extraction limits and would be placed under military occupation immediately. All colonial government functions would cease, and humans would submit to Council authority, pending a full investigation. Lisa's communicator exploded with alerts as she ran from the school toward the administration building. Staff members were shouting, trying to understand what was happening. She reached her office and pulled up the orbital display, her blood running cold at the sight of the Council fleet. She tried to establish communication with Vector, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. The Supreme Commander rejected her attempts at negotiation with contempt. He stated that resistance would be met with force and that all humans should remain in their homes. When Lisa refused to acknowledge Council authority over a sovereign human colony, Vector simply cut the transmission. Moments later, landing craft began descending from the orbiting warships. Jake knew his 3 patrol ships could not win against 40 Council warships, but he would not stand aside while his people were invaded. He ordered the Defiant, Vigilant, and Guardian to intercept the landing craft. If they could prevent troops from reaching the surface, maybe Earth would have time to respond. It was a desperate hope, but it was all he had. The Defiant accelerated toward the descending craft, weapon systems tracking multiple targets. Jake's tactical officer identified the troop transports and fed firing solutions to the weapon stations. The first missiles launched, streaking through space toward the Council ships. Several transports exploded before they could deploy defensive measures, their destruction visible as bright flashes against the planet's atmosphere. But Vector's fleet responded instantly. Heavy warships moved to protect the remaining transports, their point defense systems destroying incoming missiles with ruthless efficiency. Energy beams lanced out toward the human patrol ships. The Guardian took a direct hit that sheared through its hull, killing half the crew in seconds. The ship spun away, trailing atmosphere and debris. Jake pushed the Defiant harder, bringing his ship dangerously close to the enemy formation. His railguns fired continuously, their kinetic rounds smashing into transport hulls. 3 more enemy ships died before they could reach the surface, but it was not enough. For every transport destroyed, 10 more descended safely. The Vigilant exploded under concentrated fire, its reactor breach creating a brief new star in New Haven's sky. On the surface, Lisa activated the colony's emergency protocols. Alarms wailed across the settlement as civilians rushed to designated shelters. She dispatched security teams to key locations while trying desperately to contact Earth. The faster-than-light communication array was their lifeline, and she needed to ensure it kept transmitting. Someone had to know what was happening here. The first Council troops landed near the central plaza, their dropships disgorging hundreds of armored soldiers. Lisa expected them to move toward the administration building or perhaps the mining facilities. Instead, they turned toward the education district. Her heart stopped as she realized where they were going. The school. They were heading straight for the school where Amy and 500 other children waited in supposed safety. Lisa abandoned her office and sprinted toward her vehicle. Her security chief tried to stop her, arguing she needed to coordinate the defense, but she pushed past him. Nothing mattered except reaching that school. She grabbed 6 security officers and their weapons, commandeering a transport that raced through streets filled with panicking civilians. High above, Jake watched his weapons displays go dark as the Defiant took hit after hit. His ship was dying around him, systems failing one by one. He had managed to destroy 8 enemy transports total, but it had cost him everything. His crew worked frantically to maintain life support, as hull breaches vented precious atmosphere into space. Jake ordered all remaining power to communications, determined to witness and record whatever happened next. Lisa's transport skidded to a halt outside the school. Council soldiers had already surrounded the building, their weapons trained on the entrances. The armored figure stood nearly 7 feet tall, a mix of Kryn and other Council species. Their commander, a Kryn colonel named Zethrak, stood in the center giving orders through a translator device. She jumped from the vehicle and demanded to know what they were doing. Zethrak turned to face her, his eyes cold and unreadable behind his helmet visor. He stated that all children were to be evacuated to Council transport ships for processing. When Lisa refused and ordered him to leave, he simply gestured to his troops. Helen Carter appeared at the school's main entrance, her arms spread wide to block the doorway. Behind her, other teachers formed a human wall protecting their students. Helen's voice was strong as she declared that the soldiers would not touch these children. Zethrak raised one clawed hand and gave a signal. Energy weapons fired into the building. The school's walls exploded inward under the barrage. Screams filled the air as beams tore through classrooms where children had been sheltering. Helen died instantly, her body vaporized by the concentrated fire. Teachers fell trying to shield their students. Lisa heard Amy screaming somewhere inside and tried to run forward, but her security officers held her back as Council troops stormed through the smoking entrance. Jake watched from orbit through the Defiant's failing sensors, his crew silent around him. They could see the energy discharges, could track the Council troops moving through the building. His communications officer was recording everything, transmitting it all toward Earth on every available frequency. Jake's hands gripped his command chair until his knuckles turned white. The firing continued for 8 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the Council troops finally ceased, they began dragging survivors from the building toward their transport ships. Children stumbled out, some wounded, all terrified. Amy emerged, supported by 2 older students, her side bleeding from a grazing hit. Lisa broke free from her security team and ran forward, catching her daughter as she collapsed. Zethrak made no move to stop her as she held Amy, pressing her hands against the wound. Other parents arrived, some finding their children alive, others discovering only bodies. 73 children lay dead in the ruins of the school. 112 were wounded. The Council troops began loading the survivors onto transports despite the parents' desperate pleas. Jake's ship finally lost all power, drifting dead in space. His crew sat in darkness, breathing recycled air and listening to the reports from the surface. The tactical officer confirmed that Council forces had secured the school area and were withdrawing with the surviving children as prisoners. Jake felt something break inside him, a fundamental belief that the galaxy operated according to rules and laws that protected the innocent. Vector transmitted a message to Earth, his voice filled with false regret. He claimed that New Haven colonists had violently resisted lawful occupation, forcing Council troops to respond with necessary force. He stated that the children were being taken into protective custody for their own safety. He demanded that Earth immediately comply with a new set of restrictions on all human space activity, or face similar consequences. Lisa knelt in the wreckage holding Amy, her daughter's blood soaking into her clothes. Around her, parents wailed and cursed and wept. Security officers stood helplessly, their weapons useless against the Council's overwhelming force. The school that had been filled with laughter and learning that morning was now a tomb. Jake and his surviving crew evacuated the Defiant in escape pods before the ship's orbit decayed completely. They descended through the atmosphere, watching the Council occupation forces spread across the colony like a plague. By the time they landed, the immediate violence had ended, but the occupation was complete. Council troops patrolled every street, their weapons ready for any sign of resistance. The sun set over New Haven, casting long shadows across a colony that had lost its innocence and its children in a single day. The survivors huddled in shelters trying to comprehend what had happened. The Galactic Council, the institution that promised protection and justice, had murdered human children and called it law enforcement. And somewhere in the darkness, both on the surface and in orbit, people began to realize that this atrocity would demand a response that would shake the foundations of known space. The news reached Earth within 4 hours of the attack. Patricia Nguyen was meeting with economic advisors when her chief of staff burst into the room with a tablet showing the transmission from New Haven. She watched the footage once, her face becoming stone, then watched it again. The images of the destroyed school, the dead children, the terrified survivors being dragged onto alien ships played across every screen in the government complex within minutes. By the time Patricia called an emergency session of the human government, billions of people across Earth and the colonies had seen the recordings. Public reaction was immediate and volcanic. Protests erupted in every major city. People demanded action, demanded war, demanded blood for blood. The carefully maintained relationship with the Galactic Council shattered like glass as humanity's rage found its voice. Admiral Frank Hayes stood before the Emergency Council, his uniform crisp despite being summoned from sleep. He presented military options with the cold precision of a career officer, but his eyes betrayed the fury burning beneath. Earth's defense fleet consisted of 140 warships scattered across 24 systems. They were modern and well-trained, but outnumbered by Council forces at least 10-1. A direct assault would be suicide. Patricia listened to the military assessments and the political advisors arguing over response options. Some counseled caution, suggesting diplomatic pressure and economic sanctions. Others demanded immediate military action regardless of the odds. She sat silently until everyone had spoken, then made her decision. Humanity would pursue justice through the Council's own legal system first, not out of faith, but to expose the institution's corruption before the galaxy. Within 24 hours, Patricia arrived at the Council chambers on Concordia, a neutral world dedicated to interstellar governance. She came with lawyers, evidence files, and the moral authority of a species whose children had been murdered. The Council's Grand Chamber seated representatives from all 12 member species in a circular arrangement meant to symbolize equality. Patricia stood in the center and presented her case. The images she displayed needed no narration. Dead children in a ruined school, soldiers firing on unarmed teachers, wounded survivors dragged onto transport ships. She played audio recordings of the attack, voices of children screaming and parents begging. She cited the Concordia Accords, the 3,000-year-old law that absolutely forbade attacks on juveniles of any species under any circumstances. She demanded that Vector and every officer involved face trial for war crimes. The Council's response came swiftly and revealed everything Patricia needed to know. Ambassador Threlnack spoke for the Kryn delegation, claiming the footage was propaganda and that human colonists had used children as shields during armed resistance. 6 other Council species echoed this position, suggesting an investigation committee be formed to review the evidence over the next several years. Only 2 species voted to support immediate action: The Chitrix, an insectoid race that valued collective harmony, expressed horror at the violation of the Concordia Accords. The Delphians, aquatic beings known for philosophical wisdom, agreed that the evidence demanded swift justice, but their voices were drowned out by the majority who chose political convenience over principle. Patricia stood in the center of the council chamber and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. She declared that humanity had come seeking justice under laws the council claimed to uphold. Instead, they had found corruption and cowardice. If the council would not enforce its own most sacred law, then that institution had no moral authority over anyone. Effective immediately, humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council and would pursue its own path among the stars. The chamber erupted in chaos as Patricia and her delegation walked out. Several council species protested, claiming humans had no right to leave unilaterally. Others seemed relieved to be rid of the troublesome species. The Kryn ambassador declared that human withdrawal would be treated as an act of hostility, and that the council would respond appropriately. Patricia returned to Earth and immediately went to the Global Communications Center. Her address was broadcast to every human world and settlement simultaneously. She explained what had happened at the council, how the institution had refused justice for murdered children. She spoke of the choice facing humanity now, to submit to a corrupt system or stand alone and fight for what was right. Her voice never wavered as she authorized Admiral Hayes to mobilize the entire human fleet for war. On New Haven, Lisa organized the survivors into resistance cells. The Council Occupation Force attempted to impose order through curfews and checkpoints, but the colonists refused to cooperate. Food supplies went missing from warehouses. Equipment malfunctioned mysteriously. Council troops found themselves isolated and harassed at every turn. Jake joined Lisa's efforts, using his military training to coordinate defensive positions and guerrilla tactics. His surviving crew members became instructors, teaching civilians basic combat skills and tactics. They set up hidden supply caches and established secure communication networks. The colonists knew they could not drive out the occupation force alone, but they could make the council pay for every day they remained. The children taken prisoner remained aboard council ships in orbit. Lisa obtained intelligence that 43 of them, including Amy who had survived her wound, were being held on a ship called the Mercy's Gate. The vessel belonged to the Delphians, who had been forced to participate in the occupation, despite their opposition to the attack. Lisa began planning a rescue operation, knowing it was nearly impossible but unwilling to abandon the children. Admiral Hayes transformed Earth's entire military-industrial complex for war. Civilian shipyards began producing warships around the clock. Mining operations in the asteroid belt focused exclusively on materials for weapons and armor. Research facilities that had been developing peaceful technologies switched to military applications. Every human with military experience was recalled to service, and training centers overflowed with volunteers. The human fleet had always focused on defense and patrol duties, following council restrictions on offensive capabilities. But engineers began designing new weapons unrestricted by treaty obligations. They developed kinetic missile swarms that could overwhelm enemy point defenses through sheer numbers. They created cyber warfare packages designed to hack council computer systems. They even began producing antimatter torpedoes, incredibly dangerous weapons that the council had banned but humanity now embraced. Commander Nathan Price led the first major offensive operation. His battle group consisted of 27 ships, a mix of military vessels and armed civilian craft. They hit a council supply depot in the Kepler system, a target chosen to test human capabilities against prepared defenses. The battle lasted 6 hours and cost 11 human ships. But the depot was destroyed, and valuable council equipment was captured. Nathan's engineers immediately began reverse engineering the captured technology, particularly the energy shield generators that council ships used for defense. Within weeks, human ships began incorporating similar systems, crude compared to the originals but functional enough to improve survival rates in combat. The Galactic Council began to realize that humans were not behaving as expected. Most species, when confronted with overwhelming force, would negotiate or surrender. Humans were attacking everywhere simultaneously, hitting supply lines, colonies, and military installations across a dozen sectors. Every council species that had voted to cover up the New Haven massacre found itself under assault. The Kryn, confident in their military superiority, decided to end the conflict decisively. Vector assembled a massive fleet of 200 warships and set course for Earth itself. He broadcast his intentions openly, promising to reduce humanity's homeworld to ashes and scatter the survivors as a lesson to other species who might consider defying Council authority. But Admiral Hayes had anticipated this response. Earth's orbital space had been transformed into the most heavily fortified position in human-controlled space. Thousands of automated defense platforms surrounded the planet in multiple layers. Magnetic accelerator cannons capable of hurling projectiles at relativistic speeds covered every approach vector. Nuclear minefields drifted in carefully calculated patterns, and the main human fleet, now numbering over 100 ships equipped with the new weapons, waited in defensive positions. The trap was set. Hayes had sacrificed other systems and pulled back forces from across human space, allowing Council forces some easy victories. Everything was calculated to draw Vector toward Earth, to make him believe that destroying the homeworld would break human resistance. The Kryn commander took the bait, his massive fleet confident and contemptuous of human capabilities. On New Haven, Jake received encrypted transmissions from Earth explaining the coming battle. Help was on the way, but first humanity needed to survive the greatest military threat it had ever faced. He gathered Lisa and the other resistance leaders to share the news. They had to hold out just a little longer, had to keep the occupation forces distracted while Earth faced Vector's armada. Patricia Nguyen stood in the Defense Command Center, watching displays that tracked the approaching Council fleet. Vector's fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, their formation perfect and their confidence absolute. 200 warships representing the might of the Kryn military, more firepower than had been assembled in Council space for centuries. The Supreme Commander broadcast a final demand for humanity's unconditional surrender. Fully expecting compliance in the face of such overwhelming force, Admiral Hayes responded, with a single word transmitted in the clear, so every ship in both fleets would hear it no. Then he gave the order that would begin the largest space battle in recorded history. The human defense platforms opened fire simultaneously, thousands of magnetic accelerators hurling tungsten projectiles toward the Council fleet at a significant fraction of light speed. The Kryn point defense systems engaged, destroying many of the incoming rounds, but the sheer volume overwhelmed their capacity. Dozens of projectiles slammed into Council ships, their kinetic energy tearing through shields and armor. 3 Kryn warships exploded in the first salvo, their reactors breaching under the impact. Vector roared orders as his fleet accelerated toward Earth, determined to close the distance and bring their superior weapons to bear. But Hayes had prepared for this. The minefields activated, nuclear devices detonating in carefully timed sequences that channeled the Council fleet into kill zones. Missile swarms launched from hidden platforms, thousands of small but deadly weapons converging on enemy ships from multiple vectors. The Kryn formation began to fracture as ships maneuvered desperately to avoid the attacks. The human fleet emerged from behind the moon, their new shield generators glowing as they absorbed incoming fire. Commander Nathan Price led the first wave, his ships diving into the heart of the Council formation. Energy beams and particle weapons lit up space as both sides unleashed everything they had. Ships died on both sides, exploding into clouds of debris and radiation. Nathan's flagship took heavy damage but continued fighting, his crew working frantically to keep systems operational. He ordered his ships to use the captured cyber warfare packages, targeting Council computer systems with electronic attacks. Several enemy ships suddenly went dark. Their computers crashed or hijacked. Other Kryn vessels collided with each other as hacked navigation systems fed them false data. Vector realized too late that he had underestimated human ingenuity and desperation. His fleet was taking losses far beyond acceptable levels, and Earth's defenses showed no sign of weakening. He attempted to withdraw and regroup, but Hayes had anticipated that as well. Human ships harried the Council fleet from all sides, preventing any organized retreat. The antimatter torpedoes launched next, each one containing enough destructive power to vaporize a city. The Council had banned these weapons for good reason, but humanity no longer cared about Council laws. The torpedoes penetrated shield defenses and detonated in the heart of Kryn formations, each explosion creating miniature suns that consumed everything nearby. Hayes watched the battle unfold from his command ship, making split-second decisions that sent hundreds of people to their deaths but saved thousands more. He felt the weight of each lost ship, each crew that would never return home, but he could not afford mercy or hesitation. Too much depended on victory here, not just for Earth but for every human settlement across the stars. On New Haven, Jake led a coordinated uprising timed to coincide with the Earth battle. Resistance cells across the colony attacked Council positions simultaneously, using explosives and captured weapons. The occupation forces, already demoralized by news of the Earth battle reaching them, found themselves fighting desperate humans who had nothing left to lose. Lisa personally led the assault on the communication center, a building the Council had fortified heavily. Her team used mining explosives to breach the walls, then stormed inside in brutal close-quarters combat. She killed 2 Kryn soldiers with her own hands, her fear and hesitation burned away by months of rage. The center fell within an hour, giving the Resistance control of orbital communication. With the communication center secure, Jake established contact with the Delphian ship Mercy's Gate. He spoke with the vessel's captain, a being named Korath, who expressed deep shame at his role in holding human children prisoner. The Delphians had opposed the New Haven attack from the beginning, but had been forced to participate by Council mandate. Now, with the Council fleet being destroyed at Earth, Korath saw an opportunity for redemption. Jake proposed a plan that was insane but might work. If the Delphians released the children and provided covering fire, Jake's forces would help the Mercy's Gate escape the system before other Council ships could stop them. Korath agreed immediately, his relief obvious even through the translation software. Within hours, shuttles began descending from the ship carrying 43 human children, including Amy. Lisa reached the landing zone just as the first shuttle touched down. She ran forward as the doors opened, and Amy stumbled into her arms. Mother and daughter held each other, both crying, while around them other parents reunited with their children. Not all the children taken had survived, and those losses would haunt everyone. But these 43 represented hope that the nightmare might end. At Earth, the battle entered its 16th hour. Both fleets were battered and exhausted, but the tide had clearly turned. Vectar's 200 ships had been reduced to fewer than 40, while the human fleet had lost 60 vessels but maintained operational capability. The Supreme Commander made one final attempt to break through to Earth, gathering his surviving ships for a desperate charge. Hayes saw the maneuver and made a decision that would define him forever. His own ship had taken heavy damage and would not survive much longer. He ordered his crew to evacuate in escape pods, giving them direct orders to abandon ship. His executive officer refused, but Hayes pulled rank and threatened to have her removed by force. One by one, his crew evacuated until only Hayes remained on the bridge. He aimed his crippled ship at Vectar's flagship and engaged the engines at maximum power. The Kryn commander saw the attack coming and tried to evade, but his ship was too damaged to maneuver effectively. Hayes whispered the names of the 73 murdered children as his ship accelerated toward its target. The collision tore both vessels apart, the explosion visible from Earth's surface as a brief new star. The death of Vectar broke the Council fleet's will to fight. The surviving ships attempted to escape, but human forces pursued them relentlessly. Only 37 Council warships managed to flee the system, and most of those were heavily damaged. The rest were destroyed or forced to surrender. The battle was over, and humanity had won at a terrible cost. Nathan Price assumed command of the human fleet in Hayes' absence, ordering pursuit forces after the fleeing Council ships while beginning rescue operations for survivors. Thousands of escape pods drifted through the debris field, some human and some Council. Nathan gave orders to rescue all survivors regardless of species, knowing that Hayes would have wanted them to maintain humanity even in victory. Patricia Nguyen addressed Earth and all human colonies, her voice heavy with grief and pride. She announced the victory and the death of Admiral Hayes, calling him a hero who had given everything to protect humanity. She declared that the war would continue until justice was achieved, but that the immediate threat to Earth had been eliminated. The cost had been terrible, but humanity had proven it would not be destroyed or cowed. On New Haven, the colonial uprising succeeded in driving out most Council forces. The remaining occupation troops surrendered or fled to their ships, which departed the system as news of the Earth battle reached them. Jake and Lisa stood together watching the Council vessels disappear into faster-than-light travel. their colony finally free but forever changed by what had happened. The Galactic Council, receiving reports of the disaster at Earth, descended into chaos. Species that had supported the New Haven attack now scrambled to distance themselves from the decision. The Kryn found themselves isolated, their military broken and their allies abandoning them. Other council members began secret communications with humanity, seeking to negotiate separate peace agreements. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted fundamentally. Humanity had faced the council's might and not only survived but prevailed. The massacre of children at New Haven had awakened something in humans that the council had not anticipated. An absolute refusal to accept injustice, backed by the willingness to sacrifice everything in pursuit of what was right. The galaxy would never be the same, and the old order built on power and intimidation had begun to crumble. The Liberation Fleet arrived at New Haven 3 weeks after the Battle of Earth, led by Commander Nathan Price aboard his new flagship. 50 human warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and found a system already mostly freed by the colonists themselves. The remaining council ships in orbit attempted to flee, but Nathan's forces pursued them methodically, destroying or capturing every vessel before they could escape. Jake coordinated with the incoming fleet from the surface, marking targets and providing intelligence on council positions. The final council stronghold surrendered after a brief orbital bombardment, demonstrated that further resistance was futile. The occupation of New Haven ended 97 days after it began, leaving behind ruins, graves, and a population forever changed by violence. Lisa stood at the destroyed school site, where other colonists had already begun building a memorial. Simple markers bore the names of 73 children who would never grow up, never fulfill their potential, never see the stars they had been born to explore. Amy stood beside her mother, healed in body but carrying scars that would never fully fade. Around them, the work of rebuilding had already begun. The hunt for the remaining kidnapped children continued across council space. Human forces systematically tracked every ship that had departed New Haven during the occupation, boarding vessels and searching stations. Some children were found quickly, held by species who were relieved to return them. Others required military action to recover. By the end of the 3rd month, all but 6 of the taken children had been located. Those 6 had died in captivity, their deaths added to the toll of council crimes. Patricia Nguyen traveled to New Haven personally for a memorial service honoring all who had died. She stood before the entire colony and billions watching across human space, speaking words that acknowledged the terrible price paid. She promised that these deaths would not be meaningless, that humanity would build something better from the ashes of tragedy. Never again would human children be left unprotected. Never again would humanity trust others to provide justice or security. The Galactic Council sent a delegation to negotiate, arriving at a neutral station with offers of reinstatement and reparations. Patricia met them with Jake and Lisa beside her, survivors who represented what the Council's actions had cost. She listened to their proposals with cold courtesy, then rejected everything they offered. Instead, Patricia presented humanity's terms. The species and individuals responsible for the New Haven attack would face trial under human jurisdiction. The Kryn would pay reparations sufficient to rebuild the colony and compensate every affected family. All restrictions on human military and territorial expansion were permanently void. Any future attack on human civilians would result in total war with no possibility of negotiation or surrender. The council delegates protested that these terms were too harsh, that they humiliated proud species and violated council sovereignty. Patricia responded by showing them images from the destroyed school again, asking which of the 73 dead children they felt was worth less than council pride. The delegates had no answer and agreed to present the terms to their governments. The Kryn, their military shattered and their allies gone, had no choice but to accept. Their new government, formed after internal upheaval following the defeat, agreed to all human demands. The surviving officers from New Haven, including Colonel Zethrak, were extradited to human custody. They faced trial on Earth in proceedings broadcast across known space, where evidence of their crimes was presented in excruciating detail. The trials lasted 4 months and resulted in convictions on all charges. The sentences were life imprisonment rather than execution, a choice Patricia made deliberately to demonstrate that humans sought justice rather than revenge. The convicted officers would spend the rest of their lives in human prisons, a daily reminder that attacking children carried consequences no power or authority could prevent. During the war and its aftermath, Patricia had also been building something new. The Terran Defense Compact emerged as an alternative to the Galactic Council, an alliance built on genuine mutual protection rather than enforced hierarchy. The Chitrix and Delphians joined immediately, bringing their technology and resources. Other species, including several minor council members tired of being dominated by the major powers, applied for membership. The Compact's founding principles were simple and absolute. Members pledged to defend each other against any aggression, to resolve disputes through negotiation, and to never harm civilians regardless of species. The protection of children was elevated to the highest law, with any violation resulting in immediate collective action by all member states. Power would be shared rather than concentrated, with small species having equal voice to large ones. Commander Nathan Price took command of the Terran Defense Fleet's 2nd Squadron, a force dedicated to ensuring no human colony would ever face attack alone again. His ships patrolled constantly, their presence a guarantee that humanity kept its promises. The fleet grew steadily as new ships completed construction, incorporating lessons learned during the war and technology shared by Compact allies. 5 years after the attack, New Haven had been transformed. The colony had tripled in size as new settlers arrived, drawn by the community's resilience and determination. The mining operations had expanded beyond their original scope, now feeding an industrial complex that produced goods for trade across Compact space. But the most important change was visible at the former school site. The memorial stood at the center of an expanded education facility, the largest in any human colony. 73 names were carved into black stone that gleamed in the sunlight, each name accompanied by a brief biography and image. Students passed the memorial every day, learning not just about the attack but about the children who had died and the dreams they had held. Amy, now 15, attended the dedication ceremony for the memorial expansion. She had become something of a symbol, a survivor who had rebuilt her life despite the trauma. She spoke briefly to the assembled crowd, her voice steady as she shared memories of friends who had not survived. She talked about how they had all dreamed of exploring space, of building new worlds, of doing great things. She promised that their dreams would live on through those who survived. Lisa watched her daughter speak, filled with pride and lingering sorrow. She had remained as colony administrator, helping guide New Haven through reconstruction. The work was difficult and never-ending, but she found purpose in it. Every new building, every ship that arrived safely, every child born in the colony was a testament to survival and renewal. Jake stood in his admiral's uniform, having been promoted after the liberation. He commanded the defense forces for 3 colonial sectors now, ensuring that the lessons of New Haven informed every security protocol and contingency plan. He still visited the colony regularly, maintaining contact with the people he had fought beside. The bonds formed during those desperate days remained strong. Patricia Nguyen delivered the dedication address, her final public speech before retiring from government service. She spoke of transformation, how tragedy could either destroy a people or forge them into something stronger. Humanity had chosen strength, had chosen to build rather than surrender to despair. The Terran Defense Compact now included 50 human worlds and 12 allied species, a growing community that offered genuine partnership rather than domination. She acknowledged the cost, both immediate and ongoing. The families that would never be whole again, the survivors who carried scars both visible and hidden, the thousands who had died in the war that followed. But she also pointed to what had been built from that suffering, a civilization that truly valued justice over power, where the strong protected the weak rather than exploited them. The Galactic Council still existed but was diminished, its moral authority shattered by its failure to prevent or punish the New Haven massacre. Member species had begun leaving, some joining the Compact while others simply chose independence. The old order built on hierarchy and intimidation was fading, replaced by new arrangements based on cooperation and mutual respect. As the ceremony concluded, children released thousands of paper spacecraft into the air, each one bearing the name of someone lost. They soared upward on the breeze, spiraling toward the sky where real ships launched daily. The image was broadcast across human space and beyond, a symbol of hope rising from tragedy. That evening, Lisa and Amy stood together watching the sunset over New Haven. The colony lights began coming on, spreading across the valley like stars. In orbit, the defense station gleamed against the darkness, its weapons ready but quiet. Transport ships descended and departed on routine schedules, carrying goods and people in a rhythm of normal life. Amy asked her mother if the killed children would be proud of what had been built. Lisa thought carefully before answering, knowing her daughter needed truth rather than comfortable lies. She said she believed they would be, that the memorial and everything it represented honored their memory by refusing to let their deaths be meaningless. The living had taken the worst moment in human colonial history and transformed it into determination that such moments would never happen again.